Here we have David, who's Director of Product Marketing at FullScript. We have Priyanka, who's Product Marketing Lead at AWS, and William, who's Director of Product Marketing at Asana. Yeah, great. There was more on this page. There isn't.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Kick it off.
We'll be here all week.
And they're done. Okay, so again, I'm going to do a reminder for y'all, but also for me. The panel discussion is The Future Belongs to Crowds, Storytelling at Scale. So let's start off. I'm going to go from left to right, standing this way. David, why don't you tell us about what storytelling looks like at your organization, and what are some tips that you can give to everyone for evolving? If we have questions, let's leverage the Slido situation, and we can start asking those, and I can ask them again. But
sure. So David Tomlinson, I've been doing B2B software product marketing for about 20 years now. And I've been the first product marketer in 4 different companies. So everything I know about this stuff, I learned on the job by falling on my face multiple times to eventually figure it out. And what I'm finding lately is that my team can't be everywhere. So I'm leaning into frameworks that help people ask the right questions so they can self-serve. And we'll probably talk about that in a little while.
Don't tease it. Give us more. What are these frameworks? Tell us more, David. Yeah.
I've spent the last year trying to build validation within FullScript around what product marketing is and what we do. And when I tell that story to the head of product or the head of marketing or the head of sales, I talk about teaching karate when I was a stay-at-home parent. I spent 10 years teaching karate, and there were 3 classes. The first class was this class of 2 to 4-year-olds. And there were about 20 of them. And I had to sort of, learn crowd control and the basics of getting them to, not pick their noses and stand in line. And to get to yellow belt, these little kids had to learn just 3 things. They had to learn a kick, they had to learn an elbow, and they had to learn a creed. And the first creed, which goes, I will develop self-discipline in order to bring out the best in myself and others. And what I was finding is that the kick and the elbow were very easy, these small motor movements for these little kids to get. But hardly any of them could get the creed. So, you'd get snippets of it. You get I, self, I discipline, others. You just couldn't get that whole sentence. So about 3 years into this 10-year journey, I look to the little girl next to me and I say, do you know what self-discipline is? And just got nothing, So we took a step back and started explaining what self-discipline is and the concepts behind this creed. Self-discipline is doing the right thing when no one is looking. Treating others, with respect is what bringing out the best in yourself and others is. And we talk about the golden rule. And when I am trying to validate what product marketing does and sell it throughout the business, I say to people, now imagine if that 3 years was 3 months or 3 weeks or even better. You had the right curriculum and the right buyer insight and were asking the right questions before you ever had your first class. What works there is this is a story that's really personal to me. It's true. I care about it. And it also resonates and sort of illustrates what our team is going to be doing for you. So that's one way, Priyanka, you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Priyanka Tiwari. I'm a product marketing manager at AWS, Amazon Web Services. And I've been a storyteller all my life. I started my career as an embedded systems engineer. So I joke that I've actually told good stories to make my way into marketing. And I feel like storytelling is pretty much everywhere in every part of product marketing that you do. I've worked in different domains, being a product marketer for data storage, and then application performance monitoring, and conversational AI before coming to AWS, which was fun. And now at AWS, I'm trying to tell a connected story across our 3 different product categories: databases, analytics, and machine learning, to decision maker audiences. So I feel like storytelling is all about connecting the dots, talking about the transformation, your own transformation, your customer's transformation, and just making those stories memorable, revealing what's underneath them. And as David mentioned, explaining to your internal and external customers what that story is. And on more personal front, I'm a mom. I have 5-year-old twin boys. Yep. So storytelling is pretty much our life. If you want to instill anything in little kids, you have to make it entertaining. You have to make it easy to remember, and you have to make it easy to follow, and you have to give them a clear CTA.
Okay, everyone should write that down, because that's how you need to talk to sales. Like, really, like paint by numbers, hold their hand. Tell me if I were 5 situation with sales.
Exactly.
Like everything Priyanka just said.
Exactly. So I get to practice storytelling in my day-to-day life as well. So happy to be here.
And William Chia, I am Director of Product Marketing at Asana, a data privacy company that helps you do the right thing so that you can keep your users' data private and build trust in your brand. I started off life, like a lot of folks in here, in engineering, system administration, and made my way into marketing. So hey, I'm a product marketer. And this is pretty fun right now because I think everyone in the room, I've even heard this several times today, oh, who are you? What do you do? I'm a storyteller. I think if there's one thing that unites all of us in here, we're all storytellers. So in one way, a little bit intimidating for us, like how are we going to tell a room full of storytellers how to be better storytellers? But on the other hand, it's something that we know we're all very, very passionate about. So as Priyanka, Data, and I, we had a few kind of prep calls and a few chats, and we just thought about what did you, in this room, what did you care about a lot? So I think we have some good stories to share right now, and if you hop on the Slido, we can do questions as well as we go along. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that we chatted about was, how do you use storytelling in product marketing? It's probably part of every single thing we do. So unpack that a little bit. Where is the intersection between storytelling and product marketing?
I can get us started. As I mentioned, it's pretty much everything, whether it's core product marketing duties like creating messaging, positioning, launching new products, or more on the applied product marketing side, as I typically call it. Solution marketing, portfolio marketing, storytelling is important there as well. And lately, I'm living storytelling by being at Amazon, because as you all know, we don't do PowerPoints, or we avoid doing PowerPoints. It's always documents. It's always 2-pagers and 6-pagers. So when you're writing your individual plan, when you're writing your team's plan, when you're doing your operational planning, when you're asking for budgets, when you're writing a press release for a future product, it's all writing. And when we are writing these things, we always do the Simon Sinek golden circles, like why is it important? What are you talking about? How it's going to change people's lives? So what? Why is it important in that aspect? The headwinds, the tailwinds. So pretty much every writing that I do as part of my work, even if I want to ask for $50,000 to run an event, it's storytelling. So I'm using storytelling in everything, not just the external customer stories, but even the day-to-day product marketing stuff.
There's a fun question in the Q&A that came in, and I'm going to add a follow-up to that. But specifically for Priyanka, can you repeat, what are those 3 aspects of storytelling? But then also maybe share more, and this applies to everyone in the panel, share more around how do you segment, how do you tell the right story to the right persona? Not even just who's external from, if you're looking at a person in IT or someone that's a VP, but even that internal storytelling to get people excited. Do you differentiate that message in terms of how you talk to sales, like to a 5-year-old, as we discussed before? How do you talk to marketing? How do you talk to your leaders? Storytelling, segmentation, but also what are the 3 main components of storytelling?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question, because the 3 main components of storytelling, are there 3, depending on which framework that you choose, right? So let's go to our favorite, Simon Sinek, start with why. It all starts with why are we even telling that story, and then what are we telling, how are we telling, who are we telling to? So those are the components. But then, of course, there's hero's journey, the Joseph Campbell way. There are 12 different steps of telling the story. And then there's there's the angle of comfortable space versus the part unknown, on, and then the challenges come in. There are slaying dragons and getting help from Gandalf part of it. So it all depends on the type of framework you're using. But typically, the main components are why you're telling it, what are you telling, and to whom you're telling it. And depending on your persona, internal as well as external, the story slightly changes. So I was telling the team when we were preparing for this, my biggest storytelling challenge is the scale. I have 30,000 plus 30,000 salespeople to enable on every story or every messaging framework that we create. So for them, the stories that we create for them or the messaging we create for them is slightly different. We need to get their buy-in. And then the stories that we create externally, so what shows up on our website, what shows up in our presentation, what shows up in our keynotes, that's slightly different. So working backwards from our customer, whether it's an internal customer, an external customer, our story change a lot there as well. David?
Yeah, and I guess I would say, you mentioned the hero's journey. It's almost sort of the first buyer's journey. And as I think about it, if I had to break it down into three, consistency is key. It should feel personalized, and there should be a deepening sense of meaning as you get further into that journey or that funnel. So unpacking that a little bit, consistency, product marketers can package these stories up and enable teams such that, people, frontline sales reps before sign up are drawing people in with a consistent theme that is slightly different, but evolves and deepens, after sign up or, during that sort of, trial phase, next stage of the funnel. And at each stage, if the buyer is engaging with you and drawn in to your story and further engagement, you get a little bit more permission to talk about your features and your functions. Top of funnel, it's much more about what the buyer or customer cares about and should have nothing to do with your features or your functions. Personalization was where personas come in, and it should feel personal no matter if you're, in my instance, a medical doctor that we're selling to, or a brand supplier that we're talking to, or a naturopath who is all bought in on the story, and it's a slightly different engagement model. But the structural approach to building it is the same for all of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and if I could add one more point to that, I love the funnel that you mentioned and how you're adding in more details as people go down the funnel. One quick example of this is, I hope some of you watched the Super Bowl on Sunday. And when you're watching it, the next stat is powered by AWS. I don't know how many of you saw that. So it's powered by AWS machine learning. And then the way we do it is there are RFID tags on player uniforms. That data and the historical NFL data gets put in this amazing machine learning algorithm, and then that gives predictions on how the players are going to perform. So I don't understand sports. I'm like go sports kind of person, but it's super cool, right? Because the machine learning works. That NFL story has served us in so many different ways. The way we use it at the awareness education stage of the buyer's journey is very different from the way we use the same story at down the funnel, justification, evaluation stage. So it's more like peeling the onion part, because it's not just one machine learning algorithms, it's databases, data lakes, data warehouse, analytics, machine learning, all coming together. If you show that architecture diagram at the first call, people will run away because it's like 35 different AWS services coming together. But as we go through the funnel, we use that same story, we peel the onions, we put in different angles, we ask different questions, we gather data, we also involve different buyers from the customer side, add different stakeholders, and tell different flavors of that same story. So if it's a marketing person coming in, we tell the same NFL story from the marketing angle. If there's a CIO or a chief data officer coming in, we tell the same story through that different angle. So I tell this to product marketers a lot. If you're thinking about story in just one way, don't do that. Like if I see the slide of customer story, problem, solution, and business outcome one more time, because the real story happens between those three different sections, right? And that's where you need to capture the story. It changes depending on who you're telling to. And that's why crafting your story or pivoting your story, depending on who you're telling, the different buyer persona is absolutely important.
Yeah, I think in this middle section here, we were just chatting about sales enablement. And how do you get folks to pick up on what you're putting down or the things you're enabling with them? And I love this concept Priyanka is talking about. We're peeling the onion. And so obviously, we use storytelling everywhere, right? Everything we do is storytelling. But very chiefly and right in front of us is the customer stories that we tell, core component of product marketing. And to Priyanka's point, if the only thing you're doing is you roll out the same generic case study in a PDF, the problem, the solution, sure, that's okay. You can probably do that in creative ways. But you can take that same story, the same NFL story, and you can peel it off. So something we did at my last gig in our customer marketing org was we would call them snackables, vignettes. And the idea is here, yes, you have the PDF or you have the web page that is 2 pages or 4 pages of content that describes in detail. And sometimes that's helpful, and sometimes somebody might actually read that out of maybe 1 out of the 100 people you send it to actually reads this thing. But within there, you have these little snackable vignettes, right? There's probably 2 or 3 smaller stories within that's a little buyer's journey, a little hero's journey. The customer's the hero, and they had to do this, and this was their challenge, and then this was the solution. And so by taking a larger artifact, right, or larger asset, and you decompose it down into these smaller parts, and then having that as a library for your sales team, oftentimes those little stories, and they have them as well, right? Like if you just go talk to your top sales rep, and you just listen to a couple of their calls, or you hop on a few of their calls, you'll hear them telling those vignettes, because they have them from their last company. So that's one way, part of the topic here is doing this at scale.
Yeah.
How do we scale out the storytelling? So one very pragmatic way is to take a bigger story, and you use that in some places, and then you decompose it into smaller stories. What do you think, David?
Well, I think, raise your hand if you've got more work to do than the product marketing team could ever possibly do, So what you just described, how do you operationalize that, right?
Exactly.
I like this idea of snackable and bite size and little stories that sales teams or email marketers or agencies can use. I lean into 3 frameworks here. The first is like a modular persona builder. So a lot of times people will come to you and say, I'd like a persona, and you step back and think, oh my God, this is 6 months of research. I've got to do one-to-one interviews. I've got to do surveys. I've got to, this is going to take me forever. But if you've ever played something like a Dungeons and Dragons, you can build any character from about 6 attributes. So if you describe 5 or 6 attributes of your addressable market, create some sort of widget, and we did this at FullScript, where we had about 10 attributes with some descriptions of high, medium, low for, let's say, technology savviness or willingness to change or supplement IQ. An SDR or a salesperson on a call can pick just one of those and get a piece of enablement, or they can, if they're really interested, go into a call by picking all of them and have a whole panoply of enablement in front of them. So giving tools for teams to self-serve is key for me to get anything done. We also use something called a universal messaging framework. So it's 2 slides. And on one slide, you've got 4 or 5 personas summarized in 4 or 5 bullets. Another slide, you've got the 4 or 5 themes that all of them will respond to. Now, this won't help you with a product launch, but it could help with an email or a landing page or onboarding a new employee that reduces the incoming requests for your team. So I mean, these are just some of those types of tools that I use and that you can use.
We have a few questions
Yep, go
through the
ahead.
chat that align to a lot of this. AWS, Priyanka, you were popular for a lot of these questions. They're not showing on the board, so I'll save those to the end. But on this conversation in terms of content and how do we position stuff and framework and things like that, there was 2 that I'll call out. So 1, how do you build narratives using emotion? What are your guys' general thoughts and guidelines from your experience? And then 2nd is, what about leveraging review sites or things like that to let customers tell your story at scale. And I know we've discussed before that, like with Cheryl's thing, it's not always easy to get customers to respond to surveys or other things where we ask them information, but how can we scale some of that, and what have you all done in your experience on both of those?
So maybe we take those one at a time. Because we got two questions. We have, what was the first one, emotion?
First one is, okay, cool, how do you build narrative using emotion? Because
How do you build
storytelling
narrative
is one
using
thing.
emotion?
What do you want them to feel? Like,
Yeah.
and like depending on who
What
you're
do you-
selling
what
it
do y'all think about that one?
I think it has to, go
Oh,
ahead.
no, go ahead, please.
Rock, paper, scissors. It's fine.
For me, it comes down to frameworks, and for positioning, to get to that, asking the right questions, and I have a 6-step framework that I use. What is this person's problem? What is the obstacle? And I mean problem have nothing to do with my solution. What is their day-to-day issue like that dictates their success in life, right? Why aren't they solving that problem? What would motivate them to solve it? What is the goal of this communication? What do they need to hear? And that what do they need to hear needs to ladder up to those pain points. And if you can do that right, that is an emotional response, simulated emotional response in a marketing piece, followed by reasons to believe that. So that's how I do it. And it's a framework that I can give to other teams, and they can ask and answer those same questions and get close often.
Yeah, I love that. My answer is going to be slightly similar to that. I think it was Peter Drucker who said that all marketing is change, right? I'm going to change that slightly. I feel like all storytelling is about change, right? It's about transformation. It's about metamorphosis. It's about reinvention. I like things in 3, as you have noticed. The change can mean different things to different people, and here's where emotions come in, right? Change could be exciting, change could be fun, or change could be scary. And I think that's where you can pick those emotions out when you're writing your stories or your messaging framework about that change. So we do messaging frameworks slightly differently at AWS. They're slightly longer than slides, but we make sure that they are easy to pick, that there are sections in the messaging framework that my extended teams can basically copy paste if they're doing email campaigns, they're doing social media, things like that. I have another challenge. My initiative is called AWS for Data. I'm putting together databases, analytics, machine learning together to tell that cohesive story. And I sit in the center. Like, don't we all think that we sit in the center? But yeah, I do sit in the center of things. And right. And then my messaging is used by all the different industries we target, all the different segments we target. And when I say segments, it's like startup, greenfield, enterprise, SMB, digital natives, things like that, and all the geos, because the same messaging framework looks different in EMEA versus in Greater China region, and across our partners, GSIs and ISVs. So if you think about this one messaging framework trying to be it all, it's impossible. So what we do is we create flavors. Of course, we capture the emotions, what we want to drive. For example, the word modernizing something doesn't work in China. I recently learned that because apparently the government went through the whole modernizing campaign back in the 60s, so modernization for them is done. So if you say that you're modernizing the cloud, that doesn't work in China. So things like that, you have to consider the local nitty-gritties, the nuances, and you have to change that. So when we create that core messaging framework, we also create the flavors that suit all of these different counterparts. So my teams have something that works for them. AWS for Data for healthcare in China region. I know it's a lot of work up front, but it definitely works. And it also saves us time in the long run, because now that messaging framework, as David said, acts as a single source of truth for everything that they do. The content they produce, the programs they conduct, the campaigns that they do, the event presentations that they build. So I don't have to get involved in all of these different things happening at all of these different flavors, as long as I have visibility into that flavor that they have created. Another thing that we are just piloting literally this quarter is coming up with some kind of an SLA process. So if they have something, if the EMEA team is running roundtables for chief data officers and they're using my messaging, there is a process where they can just quickly run that messaging framework through us. We're still piloting that. We'll see how that goes. But that's one way we bring the structure to the scale and a little bit of emotion to what we do.
Can I just make a point here, too, before we move on to the next one? emotion is a high bar, right,
Yeah.
to achieve. If you don't believe this story, if it just makes logical sense to you and you don't actually feel it, you're probably not there yet. And so I think it was Danielle, the very first speaker, that talked about leaning on the creatives, leaning on editors, leaning on people who can take this very logical construct that you've developed and take a little bit of a leap. I think that's key. So collaborating with the creatives and trusting their judgment sometimes, you know, and taking a leap of faith there.
Yeah.
Thinking about scale and emotion. So in my current role, I'm a solo product marketer at a smaller startup, and I have been on large teams at larger companies, but a similar tactic works the same way. And I'll share a story of how do you scale storytelling. So one of the ways one of the questions could be, how do we scale storytelling in terms of we tend to be passionate about storytelling, and we consider this a craft, but how do we replicate ourselves? How do you duplicate yourself? How are you making others great storytellers? Well, one of the ways I do it in my org, because we're small and I get to do the quintessential product onboarding. You join the company, what are our products, what do they do, who are the customers? But the way I position it is I call it, how to tell your friends about Asano. So they show up to the meeting, and I put up a slide, and it's a slide of like some friends around a campfire, and they're drinking margaritas, and there's like a guitar there. And so I say, here's the scenario. You're like at the campfire this weekend, and you're drinking margaritas, and there's a large guitar for some reason. And your friends are asking you, like, oh, tell me about your new job. What are you going to tell them? And so this is the onboarding session I do, and I basically say that the answer to how to tell someone about a company or a product or a feature is great storytelling. And what I tell them is, okay, hey, I've spent my entire life becoming a better storyteller. This is like an art and a craft you can spend a lifetime honing, but what can you get to in a half hour? And I'll give one of the tips that I give to the crew, and I make them practice this. And this is everybody from like sales and marketing to engineers. I make engineers tell stories on the call, to finance, whoever joins. We make them all storytellers. And so one of the answers that I say, and this kind of comes down to how do you evoke emotion? Mm-hmm. And what happens is when you say, tell me about your company, usually they say like, oh, well, we're a privacy solution, or we're modernizing the cloud, or this is what we do. And they immediately go to the solution. And they forget the problem, right? So what I say is like, just at a fundamental, like 5-minute lesson on storytelling, start with the problem first. What's the problem? And talk about that first. And then when people hear that, sometimes we call this in the storytelling world a mystery to be solved, right? You create a mystery to be solved. Like, what is the problem? So if you want great storytelling, whether it's from your messaging or your enablement or your internal positioning documents to external content, starting with that problem or that challenge and making that concrete and making that reputable, something that your user can understand, or your end user, your customer, whoever's consuming, your end audience, that's where some of the emotion starts to come in. So like, I'll give you an example. When I rolled into my company, our homepage H1 messaging was Asano. We make privacy easy. And after I got done throwing up in the bathroom over this terrible messaging, I said, we're going to outlaw makes it easy. If you go to 100 startups, they all say makes it easy. How many of us have probably written, we make X easy? And there's no emotion, right? There's no emotion in that because there's nothing concrete. It's generic. You could take the same thing, you could put it on 100 websites. So one of the things that we discovered is our largest competitor, in order to implement the product, well, it usually takes about 9 months in professional services. But with our product, you could actually get up and running in days. And so it's Asano, launch your privacy program within days, not months. It has a little bit of a different feel. Now you start to talk about the problem. Oh, what's my problem? I need to get this going. Well, is it going to take me months? That's painful. That's where, if you can tap into the pain and the conflict, that's where some of the emotion comes in and in the details.
If I could make one more point about emotion.
And that was actually a question, which
Yeah.
was, how do you create your own story that differentiates from your competitors? So let's hang out at this topic for a little bit, because honestly, like you guys were even explaining, like I'm in cyber. It's a very saturated industry. If I look at all these damn competitors on the website, I was like, ooh, those are pretty graphics. But I look at the message, I'm like, could replace 20 vendors in this spot and it would still be true. So I'm sure this is an area many of us are struggling. But yes, let's hang out here for a couple of minutes. This is a great topic. Tell us more.
Yeah, so a question to the group. How do you know if somebody does CrossFit? They tell you in the first 20 seconds of meeting you, right? Same with Peloton. It's because they feel connected to the brand. So Harvard Business Review.
Personality trait, but that's a separate discussion.
Right? Yeah, exactly. But there was a study done by Harvard Business Review. It's a old research. Please send me a message. I'll share that with you. It was from 2016. But it's called a value pyramid. And they have literally put all the emotions that people feel to a brand in a value pyramid. The higher you go, the stickier your brand becomes and the powerful your stories become. And you can clearly see that the time saving, the cost reduction is all at the bottom. It's all the table stakes. That's important. You have to talk about that. But as you talk more about the affinities, the something that is greater than all of us, the brands become more stickier, the stories become more powerful. The B2B one, I have a printout of that in my office. I take that job to job. I can see that all day. And then every time I'm writing something or creating something new, I make sure that I'm ticking majority of those value assets. It's a brilliant, brilliant paper. 15 minutes of your time, it's totally worth it. Print it, keep it on your desk.
Does anybody know Andy Raskin? Does anyone follow
yeah.
Andy
Good
Raskin?
follow on LinkedIn if you don't follow him already.
I feel like competitive intelligence is as much about the long game process of just doing the work to keep your eyes open and your finger on the pulse of what's happening, as it is about changing the narrative. So if you don't strategically change that narrative, you're going to get into a feature function argument. You're going to have a matrix of features that some people value and some people don't, and there will be a price list next to each of those features, and it's a race to the bottom. And so there's a real storytelling, but it's sort of like a jiu-jitsu move, and it's difficult to do. After you've done all that analysis of your competitors, what is that old game that they're playing, and how have you reinvented this space? And if you can summarize that well, it makes that competitive discussion easier. So it's a little narrative trick. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily the hero's journey, but it's a narrative trick that makes those discussions easier.
Also, William, when your example in terms of, was it your example with the remove the easy situation and give them like time, value? What's that justification? Like, so quants and stats go a long way, especially when looking at your competitors in terms of, we'll do this better in X amount of time. We're going to save you X much more money. Because I think when customers are looking to implement new services, they're looking at new vendors or trusted partners, the biggest issue is, cool, how much time is this going to take me? How many more resources am I going to have to like retrain? So it's essentially a risk issue for them in implementing any tool, any product, any whatever you're doing, any transaction. This covers all of our industries.
Well, and also being very clear about the value of those things to the person you're talking to, because certain personas might value time or efficiency, certain might not, and so having done that work, which is the product marketer's gig, to survey your customer base to know and enable your team with that understanding going into the talk, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's got to be credible.
Right.
If you're in a solution area or your product is a place where you say, we'll get you up and running in 5 minutes, and that's par for the course, that's not surprising. That's not compelling. There's no emotion. That's table stakes and expected. If the expectation is, okay, I know I need to do this thing, and my general thought process is this is going to take a week, and I know it's going to take a week, and it's taken me a week for the last 5 years of my job every time I need to do this thing. And then you come around and you say, actually, our product can get this done for you and get it done in 5 minutes. All of a sudden now maybe that sounds too good to be true. So you still lack credibility. So understanding your audience, clearly it changes where it goes. And the emotion comes out of targeting the thing that they care about or the thing that's important to them specifically.
Yeah, and setting clear expectations as well. Like lately, we've started telling our connected data story in a art of the possible way. We literally called that session Art of the Possible. It's not about solving the problem at hand, but showing the vision of what our technology can do for your companies. It's a very intimate setting. We go to large companies, we do that session, and we just let people brainstorm. So it's not even about what it can do today, what it can do for a long term, and then we show these bigger than us kind of stories. We talk about how the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts, and it's been amazing. We've also, like somebody did analysis that if we directly do sales, like typical first call deck, this is the solution, this is how we solve problem, versus if we do the art of the possible exercise with the higher ups in the company and then do the sales, we're more successful if we start with the vision and work backwards from that.
Okay, since we're on this topic, there's a fun question on this, but also shout out again on that value pyramid. What was it? A few people asked, what was it called?
It's HBR value pyramid, B2B value pyramid. There's also a B2C version, which is not that great, but B2B value pyramid. It's an old article. It should be not behind a paywall because it's 2016. But if it is behind the paywall, just shoot me a message on LinkedIn and I can share the PDF.
Cool, thank you. There were a few questions. Okay, so back to this value thing. So for example, even the C-level. Oftentimes, maybe they're a CEO that got there and was placed by a board, but how many times do we have like CEO founders? Those are fun. And they have a story that they'd like you to tell. So for example, talk a little bit more about how you're selling that story internally, or if your hand is forced a little bit in having to sell a story that isn't yours, that is C-level, and how do you balance both?
David, do you want to start?
Sure. I just hosted a roundtable with all the C-level, the VPs and above at Fullscript to do just this thing, because we had some new product leaders and sales leaders and merchandising leaders who had big visions about where our story could go. And what I did was I met with the CEO before we hosted the roundtable to predetermine the outcome, because what I've learned about these socialization of the one story projects is if the CEO is not behind it, it will not work. Figured out the story with him, hosted a 2-day workshop, solicited ideas and Fig Jam boards and everything, presented some options for a vote, and then the one that won was the one that we arranged beforehand. So it is as much about stakeholder management as you can have the most tight, perfectly constructed elevator statement in the world, and if your CEO isn't bought in, it's not going to go anywhere in your business. So it's a little, I know it's sort of a pragmatic approach to it, but that's a key component.
Yeah, and I agree with the exercise part too. So I don't have a CEO level story, but the service level VP of all of Amazon machine learning, Swami Sivasubramanian, the most humble guy in the world, if you can find. We wanted to position him as the face of AWS data and AI, and we wanted to uncover the stories, but all of his life he's like told the stories about the product, etc. So a team actually spent a lot of time with Swami and found out that he started at AWS as an intern, and back when AWS didn't exist, he started an Amazon.com, and then they saw the scale of Amazon.com, and they realized that they couldn't solve it with Oracle database, so why don't we create our own database? And that was an idea that came from an intern, and it eventually became DynamoDB, one of our biggest selling databases ever. So we captured that story, and we worked with him in a way that he can tell that story. Again, that's not our story, but my team spent time with him to get that story out. And now we talk about that story all the time. And then the best thing that came out of it is everybody in AWS, if you are a marketer, you're a social media manager, you're a developer, you're a product manager, everybody is a builder by nature. That's our own individual story. So we all have our builder type stories, and we use that in our personal marketing, our personal branding, when we write things. And I think that definitely makes us unique. So of course, while helping him tell his builder stories, I think we uncovered something very special, that we all have a builder in us, and then we started telling those.
Yeah, I think implicit in the question, how do you work in a scenario? You have a story, and your founder or your VP or the senior exec has a different story. What do you do in that scenario? Well, I think there's two elements to it. So one of it is you embrace the story, right? Just because we're storytellers doesn't mean we need to be the story creator. And as Priyanka just shared, sometimes the best stories are ones that you discover, not ones that you invent, right? So if your founder has a story, great. You can take your art of storytelling. You can say, okay, like, how do we make the story more compelling? How do we drive a deeper emotion? Like, maybe it's generic and we need to get more details. Maybe we need to, like, drive a starker contrast and where the conflict is going, but it's still the founder's story, and you are improving it and making it better, right? So you don't have to be the story inventor. You can take stories from all around you.
Exactly.
Okay, so on that note, great topic, keep talking. Cool, it doesn't matter attribution. I mean, we all like product marketing to get credit, let's be real. We don't get enough of that when it comes to an organization. But the question came up, brand marketing. Oftentimes, they're there to maintain, create, shape, drive awareness on what that brand image is. In y'all's experience, how are you working with brand? Who owns that storytelling? How are you collaborating? Tell us the scoop. We're all curious.
I can start because our brand marketing is amazing. All the cool sports ads that you see, PGA Golf, NFL, AstraZeneca, that's all brand marketing. If you haven't seen it, they started this thing called Curiosity Kid a few years back. It's seeing technology through a kid's eye, and it's an advertising series, which is amazing. So they own that AWS level advertising, branding. They have the top line messages that we always drive. And then different service level product marketers or category level product marketers or portfolio marketers like me do one double click down from that. So if they are telling the same NFL story, because we just talked about that, at that very high level, we talk about how we are improving player safety with Amazon Redshift and a few other services, things like that. And then again, there's a category team who does like one level deeper than that. So all of us tell the same story, but from different angles for different purposes and different stages of the buyer's journey. So we work very closely with each other because, again, we don't want to tell messages that are different from each other. So they share their messaging frameworks with us. We do a double click from that, and there are different teams who do double click from our messaging.
What I've struggled with and I'm trying to solve with this is often the product roadmap and what the brand team wants to talk about are not aligned at all, right? So what I've done at FullScript is we know what the next 6 to 8 months of the product roadmap is going to be. The product marketing team created 3 messaging themes that don't mention product at all, but that into which those releases could be plugged throughout the year, and then worked with the brand team to do drumbeat campaigns on those 3 themes across the funnel, such that the launches get a little bit easier because you don't have to put as much effort into the messaging because some of it's already been done. The brand team gets excited about it because it's not talking about a feature or function because they don't want to do that. And the product team's happy because they feel like we're talking about their product all the time. No, it's not easy because it takes buy-in from the product team and the brand team and all those people below and changing habits and processes. But we're seeing some traction there, and I hope it works. I don't know if it'll work, but I hope it works.
I think depending on the size of your org, right? So in a smaller organization, product marketing, you might own brand. You don't have a brand team. We've kind of seen that today. I've been in that boat. And in a very, very large org, you may not even ever talk to your brand team. They just hand you the 40-page messaging guide, and then you turn that into your product messaging. But I would say that the brand team is a key collaborator that can make you better at what you do. So at my last gig, there was this amazing woman who was one of our brand marketers. And she was really, really talented at turning a phrase, coming up with language that was catchy or that popped or made you using a word that you didn't expect. And she was also brilliant at the art of simplifying and taking a longer phrase and distilling it down to its most pithy essence. These are things that I think I'm decent at, but she was amazing at it. But she didn't know the product, she didn't know our customers, and she wasn't as, didn't have the technical background, and we had a technical product. Well, we collaborated on all the things. When she wrote her brand positioning, she would write it all up, and I would just come in and I would review with her. And I would tell her, like, when you say this, like, it's very clever, but this is how it will land to our audience, right? And I would share some of those customer stories, like, this is who our persona is and how they're going to interpret that. And so, we're trying to go out to China, and modernization is this thing from the 60s, right? And you bringing that knowledge. And then similarly, she would review my copy, and she would review my positioning. And, even though I think I'm trying to get better at this, a lot of times it's like, can be boring or not as crisp. And she would just refine all of those things. And so this is like a very powerful collaboration. Again, maybe if you're in a very large org, you can't work that closely with your brand team. But there's probably somebody you can find that you can help them with skills that you have, and they can help you because they have skills you don't have.
That's a real good point. Like, I've been in situations where, like, the head of a brand team or the head of a demand gen team is not really bought in on what product marketing is trying to do. But if you sort of target their next level reports with some of these frameworks, they start to look better in meetings. They have more answers to things. Their messaging is more on point. They will embrace from below, and it can sort of convince. It's this, like, you don't always have to collaborate with the head of brand. You can collaborate with the people doing the work.
Yeah, and that's also true too, that the more, and in this case I did get to collaborate with head of brand and the folks, but the more I invited them in to say, can you review my stuff? Can you help me out?
Yeah.
Right, open book. Well, lo and behold, look, all of a sudden they knew the product better.
Yeah.
All of a sudden all the brand messaging got better because of that collaboration, and I got better at my craft. Right? These were very talented writers and crafters in their own right, and I got better. So there's like a lot of value in that collaboration.
Point.